Agent Morris with the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
Traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or whether any direction it wanted to go. Why it could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
What? Why? There we go. Hey, good evening, everybody. This is the latest edition of Anomaly Now, live from Austin, Texas. It is October 14th, 2020. It is Wednesday night. Not bad for a Wednesday night. I'm Smiles Lewis.
Hey, Miles. Good evening. And then good evening, anomalous ponderers. We're back again, weekly, apparently.
How are you doing?
Good, Miles. I'm doing really good. Man, there's so much to talk about. I just want to remind everybody how much work you do on the back end on our Flipboard page to the archives. So many good stories to unpack. We'll get into a few of them per usual tonight. But folks, just go to the Flipboard page. Miles does all the hard work, and you're going to find all the anomalous information you could possibly consume in 1 week until we see you again next week.
Yeah, folks can go to AnomalyArchives.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit located here in Austin, Texas, and we need your help and support. So please check us out over at our website and our various social media sites, including, of course, the YouTube channel, where you can check out past episodes here of Anomaly Now, as well as other past lecture events. And we've got big news about that coming up soon. Not tonight yet, but this past weekend was yet another great free online paranormal and UFO related conference put on by Mike Huberty and the Milwaukee Paracon. Milwaukee Paranormal Conference, folks. That's the Milwaukee Paracon 2020. A lot of great speakers. Got to see folks that I had never actually give lectures before, but who I knew were, dare I say, up-and-comers, but some of them have been at this for a long time, but I just wasn't familiar with them because they're over there in the Midwest, and they were putting on a great show, and just want to thank them for listing us as a supporter, a sponsor, and for pulling off another awesome event, 3 days, and I think 18 speakers. It was a lot of fun, and looking forward to more of those, including coming up October 17th and 18th is the DanburyLibrary.org's Western Connecticut UFO Conference 2020. This is a cool little event being put on through the local Connecticut Public Library, so that's really cool. We'll have links to that in today's show notes afterwards once this gets archived online. So moving right along. So I don't want to spend just too much on this issue, this particular news item, but we Austin is no stranger to strange stuff. It's not called keep the mantra of keep Austin weird has been around for a long time, and Austin certainly has its share of strange events. But one of the stories that we have over here on the Flipboard is this woman protests outside of Texas brewery, accuses it of being satanic cult in viral video. Now, we're not going to get too deep into this. I honestly, I feel a little not so good even talking about it, because in some ways I worry that people, I don't want to accuse this person of having some kind of mental issue, but it's clear that this person is in the thralls of what is become known as the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, and it's also part of the QAnon type conspiracy theorizing, a lot of which in years past, there are tentacles of which that I've not necessarily believed outright, but which I've pulled on as a parapolitical thread to research. And there's so much to unpack here, but suffice to say, she wearing a Motley Crue t-shirt of all things. I think she maybe has a sense of irony. I'm not sure, considering how all the satanic imagery that was considered a part of that milieu of 80s metal. But it's interesting that she's basically alleging that there is some sort of child sex trafficking going on at Austin breweries, and that there is secret imagery and secret messages and communications being sent through messaging, Instagram, etc., and by objects being left out on the lawn. But I really don't want to get too much into that. But suffice to say, when somebody takes it upon themselves to put themselves out there in the public, when somebody has these kinds of beliefs and puts themselves out there, it does attract my attention. And even though the person who brought this to my attention was saying, please don't go look at these news stories, and they didn't link to them. And of course, what did I do? I went and looked for it, because honestly, I'm fascinated, and I do think there's a lot of interesting threads to pull on in the Pizzagate story, the QAnon conspiracy theories. I absolutely know for a fact that we all do that there are conspiracies, there are covert operations, there are really horrific things that have been done in the name of the ends justify the means, the ends justify the means. Excuse me. So anyway, there's
Miles, remember, the Fox News affiliates, the NBC affiliates, they were going to run the Epstein story, and they got nixed from above, whatever leadership or whatever. So if people don't believe this isn't a conspiracy, you're wrong. Just do your homework, research it. This is a massive conspiracy.
So we're having some connectivity issues. It looks like Mark just froze up after he dropped a second ago. But yeah, there are in our other news items in the Flipboard feed. There's this interesting. I called everyone in Jeffrey Epstein's little black book, and certainly there are a number of other stories that we've covered over the last few years. And I do absolutely agree that there is much to be unpacked when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein story and its actual relevance to the real quote unquote deep state and the ideas of intelligence agencies, corporations, anybody compromising politicians and others through sexual blackmail. But maybe the less said on that, the better for the moment.
I apologize for my internet connection tonight too, Miles. I'm blipping in and out here, et cetera, everybody. I'll pan that out for next week. Sorry.
Hey, no worries. It is the internet. It is what it is. So there are, as I said, a number of other articles and news items we wanted to get to, including you brought to my attention what I was hearing. Is this yet more evidence of a official disclosure of alien extraterrestrial life? This news about an asteroid that might contain some super secret ingredient.
The super secret ingredient is carbon and water. So they found on this asteroid Bennu, which, by the way, I'm going to try to condense this down. Again, go to Flipboard so you can read these full articles. There's a link Miles put up for the NASA article, which is very technical. And then there's a National Geographic component to this. But anyway, so the or the existing parent body for the asteroid contained water and enough heat where there was geothermal activity. Okay, so you have carbon mixing with water. We know that is the ingredients to life. So NASA identified this asteroid, and they're like, hey, let's fly a satellite up there, or a space probe, whatever you want to call it, space probe, and let's study this thing. So they went up there and they took pictures of it for 2 years. Oh, by the way, it took 2 years to get there. They study it for 2 years. It's going to come back in 2 years. It's great because they already know that they confirmed that they have water and carbon in the form of geochemical processes called carbonates, which are basically the salts and other building blocks for life. Okay, let's just cut to it. Human beings sent a spacecraft to a foreign body, landed on it, okay, which if you had a camera, if you were on it, you'd take a picture of it and be like, what the hell's that? You know what I mean? And then they took or they're going to take samples on the 20th, so they're actually extracting something from this body, and then they're returning to their home world, i.e. Earth. Does that sound familiar to anybody out there? So we've achieved something that was only notional in comics and then in sort of the brain trust of NASA in the 80s and 90s. And here we are in October 2020, we're executing the exact same thing that we all speculate about when it comes to the UAP phenomena.
So another article, there's this new documentary about UFOs out called Phenomenon, which sounds to be very, very interesting. I have not yet had the chance to see it, but one of our board members has, and that is our newest board member, Ed Conroy, who is the famous author of the Report on Communion, the book about Whitley Strieber's UFO experiences as documented in his original book Communion, as well as the follow-up Transformation. And you can read that over at San Antonio Express News, their expressnews.com website. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm a sucker for any UFO related documentaries. But this one especially, I think, could be really, really good. And there's already a lot of scuttlebutt around it, including information having to do with the clips about Harry Reid talking about how in some of these military incursion UFO cases where the nuclear missiles have apparently been affected by the presence of the UFOs, and in fact turned off. Now, I was recently talking to a friend about how, this idea that that somehow some of these military-based UFO sightings that were occurring in the 70s and into the 80s, where these UFOs would appear outside the gate, or then over the military installation buildings inside, and then, of course, sometimes actually apparently turn off these nuclear missiles. It's like there's a number of instances in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science journals where he talks about Kit Green, a very active player in the UFO field, convincing him that such incursions were, in fact, the kind of like Delta Force training exercises that often go on, sometimes unannounced, at military facilities. Excuse me. And that's all well and good, but then when you get to this part about how could they possibly, if they have this ability to turn off nukes, I mean, that would be a game changer for military operations, obviously. We have here a clip from, I believe, the new film that is Harry Reid talking about just this. So let's go to that.
Senator Harry Reid, who instigated the secret Pentagon UFO program, confirmed what nuclear launch officers have been reporting for decades.
There's more than one up there.
UFOs have interfered with our country's most powerful weapons.
If they had been called upon by the president to launch, they couldn't have done it. All we're saying, nobody has to agree that why it's there, but shouldn't we at least be spending some money to study all these phenomenon? Shouldn't we study this stuff? The answer is yes, and that's all this was about, and why the federal government all these years has covered up, put brake pads on everything, stopped it. I think it's very, very bad for our country.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
So here's that article over at AmericanMilitaryNews.com. Now, obviously, that's not a actual, as far as I know, run by the military website, but here they are covering this issue of the idea of the nukes being shut down, and there being a possible more investigation worth having there. So.
Miles, I'll only add that I've looked deeply into this because I'm from the town of Minot, North Dakota, where the Minot Air Force Base, this is where a lot of these incursions and nuclear shutdowns happen. So through the years, what I find really interesting is that this could be our own technology, like you're saying, special forces bring in, this, they want to test this capability on unknowing, operators of these different nuclear facilities, whatnot, except for the eyewitness account. The eyewitness accounts describe what we would just, know is your classic UFO. So it's one of two things. It's either these eyewitness accounts or don't know what they're looking at, or they were under some other influence, or the government has a technology that they use to preemptively go over to Russia, let's say, and they use that technology to shut down their nukes, and it truly was a test. However, what's common across both of those is that these craft, whether it's foreign or U.S., the eyewitnesses describe classic anti-gravity, quote unquote anti-gravity type of capability for these craft that were hovering over these sites. So, there's a lot to unpack in that. Anyway.
Indeed. And, he of course is not the, Harry Reid, being out of politics is not the only, high ranking political person to talk about this stuff recently. We also have links to, this, Tucker Carlson article, or James Fox, I believe that's the director of the Phenomenon movie, and Christopher Mellon from, the To the Stars Academy and, the Mellon Foundation, on Tucker Carlson discussing UFOs and our nukes. But then there's also this Trump claims and COVID interview. He's taking strong look at existence of UFOs and at the risk of driving people away with the certain person's voice. Here you go.
People are shocked, they're stunned, and let's see what happens. But Hillary Clinton was totally crooked. And so were plenty of other people.
I've got to ask you this final question, Mr. President. I want to end on a lighter note, a mysterious subject, if you will. Can you explain why the Department of Defense has set up a UFO task force? Here's what I've got from The Guardian. The U.S. Department of Defense has formed a new body to investigate what it calls unidentified aerial phenomena, to monitor reported sightings of what most people call UFOs. Mr. President, as we wrap up here, are there UFOs?
Well, I'm going to have to check on that. I mean, I've heard that. I heard that 2 days ago, so I'll check on that. I'll take a good, strong look at that. But I will tell you this. We now have created a military, the likes of which we've never had before, in terms of equipment, the equipment that we have, the weapons that we have, and hopefully hope to.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is, of course, not the first time that the Don has commented on the subject of UFOs. Of late, there's obviously just during his administration been these big revelations about the Pentagon's UFO program and whatnot. And then I think we even commented in a previous show about the fact that he had referred to a Fox News host as a UFO expert who I, to my knowledge, is not that knowledgeable about UFOs, but and so it's not anything new. But there again is this weird connection. There are these weird connections. Anybody who follows the crazy times that we live in has probably seen these really just weird aspects, weird synchronicities having to do with what was one of them. Trying to remember the Baron von Trump novels that came out. These are children's books that came out in 1889 and 1893 that some folks consider having similarities between their protagonists and the U.S. President Donald Trump. And you can find out more about that over at good old Wikipedia. They always tell the truth there, right? Or the weird connection between possible strange suppressed technology. You were reminding me of this Mark, the John George Trump connection. This is what, his grandfather, great grandfather?
No, this is actually his uncle. So very much closer. That's right. Yeah. So John G. Trump then was working at that time. He's an MIT professor, I believe. And he was actually tasked by what was in that iteration of the CIA at the moment. But he was tasked with, after Tesla died, he was the guy that literally went into Tesla's apartment, physically extracted all of Tesla's files, found his safe and all that sort of stuff. So Donald Trump's uncle was the guy that was tasked with evaluating the technological validity of Tesla's late stage, the technology he wasn't able to demonstrate. What's really interesting about that story, what I think that just really throws a flag in the air, is that he came back with what they call a nothing burger, right? So Donald Trump's uncle says, yeah, Tesla had nothing towards the end of his life, which we all know is the culmination of a person's career or, the line of thinking or whatnot. So at a time when a man was probably more succinct than ever with his technologies, Donald Trump's uncle was the one that came back and said, yeah, nothing to see here, no problem. We'll put these files away. And Tesla didn't know what he was talking about. Oh, by the way, that ray gun that he said that could shoot things down with directed energy, that's nothing either. Oh, where are we at today? Go to the drive and just look at some of the technology that our U.S. naval fleets have. It's all direct energy weapons. So, I mean, look, we can play that game, but the proof is just minor research. You can connect the links between the fact that Tesla was the generator of our direct energy and our direct energy beam technology we're using today. Not exactly lasers, but way more effective and less power is necessary. But yeah, essentially, you think about it and you're like, the Trump family's been, pretty tapped into this high technology stuff. So when I hear the president say that he hasn't heard about it except for the last 2 days, but yet his uncle was on the precipice, like the bleeding edge of technology in the 50s, Tesla, et cetera. Got to stop and think about that a little bit. An anomalous thought, if there ever was one.
And were you telling me that is it Joseph Farrell who has drawn a connection between is it the Trump is he drawn a connection between the Trump family and the Sonoro Aero Club stories, or is that I brought up here this Atlantic Monthly article from a while back from March 2013, the Airship Club that might never have existed, and it was at the Secret Space Program conference here in Bastrop. It was billed as being in Austin, but it was in Bastrop a few years ago. It's during the horrible flooding that happened a couple of years ago, and that's where I first saw Walter Bosley speak in person. I, of course, had followed his work for a long time. If you don't know who Walter Bosley is, that's a long story, but so suffice to say that Walter has speculated about the possibility that this artist, who we were trying to remember the guy's name, Delshow put together these beautiful works of art that look like schematics for devices, and they often featured there's no pictures of them here, but the imagery of like the airships from the 1890s and so forth, the famous airship mystery wave of before they called them UFOs, before they called them flying saucers, this weird wave of aerial objects, and Delshow did these amazing artworks and talked about this secret aero club in his writings, and most people, apparently, most art folks in the art communities consider this like not really a hoax, but just a form of art that isn't necessarily based in the actual reality. But Walter Bosley, not being above drawing connections and looking into speculation, and I love me some good speculation, has drawn some interesting parallels between that and this idea of a breakaway civilization or some other kind of secret space program that may go all the way back to these early Airship waves. And I believe Joseph Farrell, one of the other speakers at that Secret Space Program conference, has explored that as well. Is that what you were saying, or am I misremembering?
Yeah, that's right. And we can't unpack it all tonight, but, in terms of the breakaway civilization, ultra-terrestrials, crypto-terrestrials, however you want to describe it, what we do have is a fairly large foundation to say that technology doesn't coincide with government funding. Okay, so what we have in our quote military is not necessarily what the state of the possible is. Everybody has to remember, even in the time of Tesla, and then previously with Bell and all the other folks that were creating the technology we utilize today, that was known as the gentleman's laboratory. It was privately funded through donors. It was no government oversight whatsoever. So you come around the turn of the century, Tesla's still alive, and he's one of these, he's out at Wycliffe, he's got, private funding. But everybody has to understand that technology was developed privately before, basically 1920, essentially, where we're gearing up for war. And then at that time, there was calls for what we call RFPs, requests for proposals from various contractors to say, okay, what do you have that can assist, the government in addressing these security issues, essentially. All right, so a lot of the technology that emerged out of these gentlemen laboratories were way too advanced to put in the public sphere. So, for example, the Sonora, Aero Club, those sort of things. There's stories where Lincoln had balloon technologies that was presented to him through these gentlemen laboratories. Joseph Farrell does a very good job of unpacking this. So does Bosley, et cetera. And that's where this notion of technology supersedes society, and they're on a separate trajectory in terms of their timeline. So even today, when we talk about the Fravor stuff and they speculate on the Tic Tac, they always have to ask themselves, is this possible that this is a technology that was on a separate timeline than the government or the public need to know basis? And that's where a lot of these really interesting anomalous thoughts come from, is because I think it's really plausible to think that we had a society that was built on, quote, gentlemen's laboratories, and then the fact that the government finally found a funding mechanism through academia where they could try to hijack some of this technology, and then you get into the patent office and a lot of all like that. But anyway, I'm just throwing some stuff against the wall there for people to think about. And through our next shows, we'll try to unpack maybe a little bit of this at a time as we go, because it's a large story.
And it gets to this fundamental mantra that's been around forever, that the technology we see around us is 15, 20, 30, who knows how many years, decades behind what is actually already possible, already in action, already in use by the various powers that be, whether they be military, governmental, corporate, or esoteric, perhaps. This actually reminds me of a really amazing synchronicity involving, you're telling me about actor George C. Scott and his having made some claims about, I don't know if you really even want to get into this, but just that.
Let's do it.
I'm forgetting the details, but you had told me about his having spoken about this idea of suppressed technology, or it being sequestered, advanced technological discoveries being sequestered in certain hidden archives elsewhere around. And I had told this story to our good friends, Victor and Inita, and they were in a local used bookstore with a friend who also has his history of weird synchronicities. And they had been talking about this. I'm probably getting the story wrong, but they told this friend, and he was like, "Oh, that was in that Playboy magazine issue where George C. Scott was interviewed," and he's like, "Yeah, it's that one right there." And there was the issue sitting on a stack in a giant warehouse-sized half price. It wasn't a half price books. It was a used bookstore here in Austin that they don't want me to reveal because they don't want other people's taking all the good books. But I mean, just it was this amazing. Like I had just told them about this. They tell somebody else. They go out randomly to this place, and boom, there is the issue. And while it didn't lay bare the hidden truths of these strange realities, it was just yet again one of those like you put the intention out into the universe. And this gets back to Jacques Vallée and his physics of information and how the universe is more like a bulletin board than anything, and that if you put your intention out there and then let the universe do its work, it will bring back to you what you're asking for. So be careful what you ask for.
Synchronicity is the code to the matrix, so that had to do with a synthetic fuel. So the Germans, Operation Paperclip, have developed a formula for synthetic fuel that was equally, or it provided the same amount of energy production as hydrocarbons or naturally produced hydrocarbons. So they'd figured out that they could create synthetic fuel because there was obviously a supply chain interruption during the war. And so once we had found the documents that the Nazis had developed this synthetic fuel, it actually went to not Georgetown, but the other campus up there. Oh, A&M. So A&M is where they went to that petroleum engineering department. They analyzed this and they figured out that this was a synthetic version. We didn't have to, mine hydrocarbons. Okay, so I believe it was was it a Marlon Brando film that they were talking about in that Playboy interview? But essentially, in his interview, he talked about talking to the actors and the amount of government people that came in and said, you are not allowed to talk about this whatsoever. And that gets me on my whole spiel about the whole notion of exotic technologies, the aerospace industry, and the Texas oilmen. So if the Texas oilmen, won the war because they supplied the fuel for all their ships, there's no way that they're going to allow a technology that, displaces their commodity, i.e. oil, without enough time to recover the investment that they had put into it. So the idea of a synthetic oil fueling the world, when it wasn't, hydrocarbons essentially, you'd want to sweep that under the rug if you were a Texas oilman. But that's a story for another day, Miles. We'll get to it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And synchronicities abound when you start pulling on any of the many threads of all these different subjects. So, well, that's about all we have time for today. Thank you for all bearing with my stumbling and mumbling. But there's some great more news articles over at Anomaly Archives. You can link through to the Flipboard there. And we thank you for joining us, and we'll be back next week. And take care, be safe, and we'll see you around.
Good night, everybody. Think critically, think anomaly.
Good night.
Thanks.